President Trump today announced he will lead a movement to get rid of mail-in ballots and also highly inaccurate, very expensive, and seriously controversial voting machines. He says his executive order will be the first step toward restoring trust in American elections. President Trump relayed that even Vladimir Putin had warned him about mail-in voting.
You know, Vladimir Putin said something, one of the most interesting things. He said, your election was rigged because you have mail-in voting. He said mail-in voting every election. He said no country has mail-in voting. It's impossible to have mail-in voting and have honest elections. And he said that to me. It was very interesting because we talked about 2020. He said, you won that election by so much. And that's how he got it. He said, and if you would have won, we wouldn't have had a war. You'd have all these millions of people alive now instead of dead.
Critics are already bracing. The Brennan Center for Justice criticized earlier efforts to reform voting, accusing President Trump of directing, dismantling, and weaponizing agencies so that the Trump administration can evade its responsibility to ensure the security of the elections and the freedom to vote. 19 Democratic state attorneys general, led by California's Rob Bonta and Nevada's Aaron Ford, previously sued to block similar reforms, calling them unconstitutional power grabs. Meanwhile, supporters say ending mail ballots will bring consistency after his state ended the practice of accepting mail-in ballots up to 3 days after Election Day. Kansas State Senator Mike Thompson compared the grace period to giving a football team extra chances to score after the game clock expires. California allows mail-in ballots postmarked by Election Day to be counted up to 13 days later, a policy critics liken to giving teams extra plays after time expires. So lawmakers and Republicans argue this delays results, fuels distrust, and undermines public confidence. Joining us now is Eric Eggers. He's research director at the Government Accountability Institute and author of Fraud, How the Left Plans to Steal the Next Election. Eric, I can't think of a better person to have on except for the president himself. Thank you so much for making the time.
Chanel, this is one of my favorite topics. It's great to be with you to talk about it.
Well, we have so many wonderful topics that we talk about with you that we kind of forget that this is actually one of your bailiwicks. And one of the things that I was laughing about, and I wanted your take, was how the press is now spinning this as if suddenly Trump woke up after meeting with President Putin and is suddenly concerned about mail-in ballots. He's suddenly concerned about the integrity of machines, and they're implying that this was because Putin told him to get worried about it. I find that the most amusing. What about you?
Right. Yeah, I'm old enough to remember, Chanel, that after Donald Trump won the 2016 election, he cited a study that indicated that potentially millions of illegal immigrants cast ballots in the 2016 election. Those claims, of course, as you might imagine, were jeered and sneered and shunned by so-called election experts and people in the mainstream media. And so what Donald Trump did in his first term is he actually set up a commission on election integrity. Now, you might be wondering, well, how come that commission didn't accomplish a lot? It's because they were sued into oblivion by people that by entities that George Soros was funding. By the way, you referenced the Brennan Center for Justice, which is often held up by mainstream media outlets as this nonpartisan arbiter and evaluator of just neutral democracy. The Brennan Center for Justice also receives money from those same Soros-funded entities. So Donald Trump has been talking about this for nearly a decade, and this is not the first time. And, you know, his claim that no other country in the world does mail-in balloting, I think you have to kind of unpack that to be specific. There are some countries that allow people to cast ballots via the mail, but no country does what we did in 2020, which is mail people all over the country. Not every state did this, but many states did this. Proactively mail people ballots. That is a practice that other people do not do. And I think that's one of the reasons why people correctly hold up a lot of claims and wonder about the legitimacy of the 2020 election.
Certainly. And, you know, this conversation is often relegated to what the big lie media calls the fringe right. The fringe right is all obsessed over the potential that the 2020 elections were not perfect. And they hold up on a pedestal all these officials from 2020 who said we had a perfect election. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but now we have a very different DOJ. Do you expect numbers to start coming out to try and start dissuading people from continuing to dismiss this entire conversation?
So what I do expect to happen in an optimistic way, an unfortunate reality is you can't kind of go back and prove that elections were stolen because it's impossible to connect fraudulent ballots with the actual tallies, right? It's just not something that can happen. But what I do think can happen is the way that the Trump administration has deployed smart data analytics. Think about DOJ and the way they've dove deep into these entitlement programs, and they've been able to root out waste, fraud, and abuse in the roles of people who are on Social Security or welfare that shouldn't be. I think if they train that level of analysis onto the voter rolls, now these voter rolls are held by the states. There is not one large federal voter database, and that's a challenge. But if they can get that level of analysis and scrutiny to take place at the state level, and they can create incentives for people, because for a long time, the Obama DOJ was hostile towards states that were attempting to enact these things, fueled by, again, Soros-funded lawyers. States were sued and had to win the rights, like Indiana and Ohio did, to clean up their voter rolls, as backed by the Supreme Court. So I do think you'll find the Trump administration and the Trump DOJ to be friendlier to states that want to do it. Unfortunately, a lot of these states that have problems are not run by Republicans. California's voter rolls are a disaster, and I don't expect them to take a hard look at their voter rolls anytime soon.
That said, I guess there's one of the big problems with voter rolls is you have illegal immigrants that have been added to it, people who should not actually be eligible to vote. And we've seen Harmeet Dhillon, the Assistant Attorney General, crack down on that this month. She's saying that we're going to sue states who are not maintaining clean voter rolls. But I guess I would like to ask you, is there a case to be made that voter rolls should be federalized? I hate saying it. I can't believe I'm saying it. I don't like to centralize anything in government. But is there a case to be made for voter rolls? Or do you think this is still a system that's tenable? We leave it to the states?
Chanel, it's a great question, and I share your concern about concentrating power because, remember, the one argument that gets used often is that the hardest thing to do to corrupt our elections at a national level are the fact that they're decentralized. So it's often held up the fact that each state maintains and conducts their own elections is one thing that there's not like one central database to hack. And I'm so glad you brought up Harmeet Dhillon's name because I do think she's an incredibly powerful player in this conversation. She's going to be, I think, a very important savior for the integrity of our election systems. I've heard her say that because all these states take federal money, they do then find themselves subject to instructions and oversight from the Department of Justice. And just think about this, Chanel, how much different of a conversation we're having now. Her job, Harmeet Dhillon's job at the Department of Justice, in charge of the Civil Rights Division, used to be held someone named Tom Perez. Tom Perez would go on to become the head of the DNC, but he used to work for an organization. Before he joined the Obama DOJ, Tom Perez worked for an organization called Casa de Maryland, and their job was to expand voting rights for non-citizens. In fact, the few cities that allow non-citizens to cast ballots in municipal elections in this country, many of them are located in the state of Maryland because of the work of the person Dunn who later ran the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ. Right. So now you have Harmeet Dhillon who's saying we're going to do the opposite. So that's incredibly good news for people who care about election integrity. And I do think they're being very smart about the way they wield federal power. I don't think they have to concentrate it, but I do think they should force states to allow maybe a level of auditing from the federal level to ensure accuracy and integrity.
So is that what you think the executive order will entail? Because obviously we haven't seen the executive order. It was just announced. Do you think it's going to involve auditing? That's what the executive order will be about?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we'll wait to see. I think the Trump administration seems to have pretty good instincts on this stuff, but I would say if I was going to advise them to start anywhere, it would be with the voter rolls, right? Because the mail-in balloting is in and of itself less of a problem. I mean, you don't want people to have all these extra ballots, and the fact that California, as you said, takes up to 15 days after a ballot is cast to be able to count it is ridiculous. The state of Florida counts all their ballots on the same day. The country of India, which has like billions of people, counts all their ballots on the same day. California should be able to get it together. So should these other states. But I would say that the voter roll But the voter rolls themselves have long been known to be a problem. The Supreme Court, even some of their rulings on this topic, have cited statistics that show 1 in 8 voter registrations are wrong. So you take wrong voter rolls, especially when you have these big voter registration drives on the last day, then there's not time for oversight. And then when you combine voter registration drives, lack of oversight about the integrity of those processes, and then you're mailing people ballots, that's the recipe for fraud and a lack of election integrity. So I think focusing on the voter rolls would be where I expect the Trump administration to at least start.